We're good to go.
Okay. Once again, everyone, we appreciate you taking time out of your schedules tonight to join the 2021 preseason webinar for snowshoeing, going into the winter games next year, or the on snow training next year. So again, it's very fluid. I think everyone has seen the spikes or is aware of the spikes that have occurred over the last couple of days. And then with the holidays that we just finished, and then coming into Christmas, there'll be some additional spikes that's anticipated. So we're not going to have all of the answers tonight. We're continuing to monitor the situation, not only with the CDC and other government agencies, also with whitetail, and again, with the border crossing with Pennsylvania, with whitetail being in Pennsylvania. So feel free to ask questions. At this point, we are moving forward in hopes that we can provide the opportunities on snow. And again, we're in this together, so we'll go through that. So with that, we'll have Mike. Well, the basics of Zoom, once again, hopefully everyone's familiar with this. If you have a question, you can type it into the chat box. And again, Mike will cover the return to activities and protocols, requirements that you work through your area programs with. Zach, and if Ron and Trish and others are on, can go over some snowshoeing specific information. Then, as typical, we'll have all our coaches' resources and information available to you, and then open for any questions at the end. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mike to start with all of the return to activities and the protocols and requirements there.
Great, thank you. And so that you know, hopefully this is just review or refresher for folks. All programs, to the extent that you can, and we'll talk a little bit more about the protocols with these, are encouraged to conduct virtual and in-person dry land if you can, if that's a feasible option. However, oh, my video is coming into my screen there. However, if you are looking at doing something 100% virtual, we do have the virtual training guide that Zach and the sports management team put together that's out and available. It's on the coach's resource page, and he'll touch on that, I'm sure, a little bit later. Also, in case anyone is not aware, because we cannot do overnight stays until we're essentially back to normal, if you will, phase 3. And for some other reasons in dealing with indoor protocols and such, and anticipated numbers of participants and all, we will not be holding winter games in 2021. We will, however, be having a number of on-snow training opportunities to the extent that conditions will allow. And we'll talk through a little bit of that in a bit. So moving ahead. So return to activity. Some of you may have seen this in some previous sessions for the fall. The document you see there is available on our return to activity page. You'll see the link for that several times, and Zach will include that in the follow-up email that includes the slides and such. But this has the latest information. You'll notice it's last time it was updated was October 30th. I'm sure it's going to get another update in the very near future related to basketball and some other indoor activities, but it is there, and I strongly encourage you, if you have not already done so, to download it. In fact, actually, Zach, we can email it out as an attachment and read through it. We're just going to touch on the highlights tonight with this. So these will be reiterated a couple times here. In terms of returning to activity and offering anything in person or virtually for that matter, please, please, please work directly with your area leadership. Your area directors and some of their management team members have been actively involved in this whole situation since things started happening back in March and are very well versed. They know the ins and outs here, or can get the answers for you. Absolutely work with them. Do not even consider doing something without working with them. As we go through the protocols here, these are requirements. This is not a suggestion. This is not an option. Basically, if you can't or your training program can't follow the protocols as they're presented, then you're not ready to start a program up in person. These are nationwide. There's some nuances with Maryland, as there are with each state based on the state government and a few other things, but they are absolutely required. I mentioned about the most recent protocol, that document there. With this, all medicals, all volunteer applications, et cetera, still apply during this return to activity period. They apply whether we're talking about live or virtual training. If it's a training program and you're doing it virtually, your athletes still need to have their medicals up to date. Your volunteers need to have their certifications and screenings up to date as well. As of now, well, every local program started in what we call phase 1. And while some ventured up into phase 2 for a while, given the recent spikes and increases, everybody is back at phase 1. And we'll talk through at least briefly how that can change potentially during this season. And then, as Steve mentioned, this is a regularly evolving process. We have a meeting with area directors pretty much every other Wednesday with updates and status checks and so on with this. And you know, new things will come into play depending upon what the situation is. But just be prepared for some potential changes. We have recorded 3 webinars to help train athletes in these new protocols. We strongly recommend that you ask your athletes to view each of these or put together a little viewing party on Zoom, and you can watch them together if you wish. The first 2 are content. They are not repeats. They are one and then the other that follows through. It's different aspects of the content. The third is in general a review of the first 2 in sort of a game show format. And again, the links are there. They'll be in the slides you get. They're also available on the virtual return to play website, as noted there. We'll be talking through the protocols in a moment. Again, I mentioned this will be redundant because if you don't walk away with anything else here, know that this protocol is required. So it applies to any in-person activities that have athletes. So practices, if you have meetings in person, if you have competitions of some type, they apply also. Also, we're presenting, this is what the Special Olympics Maryland protocol is. That will be adjusted potentially based on the state of Maryland. There had been a while, actually through the summer and into the fall, where the Special Olympics protocol was more restrictive, and we will always follow whichever protocol or requirements are more restrictive. So the Special Olympics Maryland protocol was more restrictive then. With some of the changes most recently with the state of Maryland, now the state of Maryland protocols are more restrictive, and so we'll be following them in addition to this. And that, for example, has to do with group sizes and so on. Even if a group is in phase 1 and has multiple standalone groups that are physically separated, they're still put at a cap of 25 people because of state of Maryland has that as a cap with that. So let's see, other stuff. We work with our number of the school systems on our interscholastic program. They will follow because those programs are entirely contained within the school systems. We're not doing it, just as we're not doing a Winter Games, and we're also not doing a basketball state championship. We aren't doing the state championships for the interscholastic program in the winter either. But they may be operating within their school systems a little different because they're following the school system standards within that. So if you do see something on social media or whatever and it looks a little different, if it's something that's run by the school system or a third party, that often is why that's the case. And then as noted again, you're not required to return to action right away. You really need to assess what's realistic for your program, for your athletes, quite frankly. We'll talk through some scenarios here or some situations where some of your athletes may not be capable or a number of them may not be capable of participating along with those requirements, such as social distancing or some of the other limitations on direct contact or indirect contact. It's okay if you don't start back up, but to have that discussion with your area director. So I mentioned there's a multi-phase plan that's in place. We are all now in phase 1. So it's, again, the stay-at-home orders, as noted there, that had been implemented way back when in the in March, April, and May, I guess it was. That's been lifted. We can do in-person programming, but groups of no more than 10 participants. And when we're talking about a participant, we are talking about every person who is in that area. We're talking about the athletes that are participating. We're talking about unified partners if you are there. That they contribute to the 10. Your coaches, your assistant coaches, whatever number of people who are physically in that group count towards the limit that are there. That said, in phase 1, you can have more than one group participating in the same facility at the same time, as long as they are physically distant from each other. So you could have a group of 10 and that are working on over here, and then you can have another group of 10 that are working way over here, 50, 100 feet or meters apart, whichever, and they can, as long as they stay as a group, they're not intermingling, but they're staying separate with that, you could do that. Again, I mentioned with the previous slide, there's a cap on that because of the state of Maryland putting a limit of 25 folks, but you could have multiple ones. But again, they need to stay separate from each other so that there's not any potential cross-contamination, if you will. Social distancing is required of 6 feet throughout. No direct or indirect contact is permitted while we're in phase 1. Again, we are in phase 1 now. Direct contact is when one person touches another person. Indirect contact is when a person touches an object and then another person touches that object without sanitizing it between. So you cannot, in phase 1, you can't have any indirect contact with that. And then no shared equipment without disinfecting again there. And pre-screening has to take place. We'll talk through the pre-screening there. So again, you need to go through that whole process. And we're talking about in those, the 10 people, those that are in that group. If you have another group, such as parents staying in the car or parents off to the side, way away, just observing, they don't count towards the 10 in that group. That said, a good question came up the other night with the Alpine crew about, so if we have parents off to the side, can they be in a group of 50 over there watching while we have a limit? And the answer would be no. I would say if it starts to look like they're getting too large, ask them to kind of disperse or just spread out a good bit there. We can, as things improve, move into phase 2. In phase 2, there's 2 big differences. One is that the size restriction or the group of people that are there can go up to a maximum of 50 people. Again, it ties in, or even if we were ready to, as long as the state has that cap of 25, we need to follow that. But in theory, we could be up to 50. We had several programs in the fall get up to phase 2 and could have larger groups there. Physical distancing is still required. But while there is still no direct contact permitted, indirect contact could resume in that case. And again, screening's in place. And then phase 3, essentially everything's back to normal. And then we're back to normal. Notice the double-headed arrow though. Just as we hope to progress, and we did again for many areas progress from phase 1 to phase 2, it also can go the other way, which is what's happened in the last month and a half or so, where everything came back down to phase 1 because of the conditions and the rise in the virus. So with that said, let's take a quick poll. We've got 2 polls there. So if you could please read through the different scenarios here and check all of them that would be permitted in a program that's operating in phase 1. The last one that you should see on your screen is soccer players take shots at soccer goal while assistant coach acts as a goalie. You may have to scroll down to see that one. When you're done, go ahead and hit submit. And whoever is Zach or Steve, whoever launched it, why don't we go when we have 9 responses, that should be, or let's go even with 8. Okay. I know it takes a moment or two to read through all the options. Okay. 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 And if you could show the results, okay. And you may have to open that up. I know on my second screen it's cut off. So really good. The first 2 would not be permitted in phase 1. The coach demonstrating from a distance of 8 feet, absolutely, that's good. Everyone got that. Same thing with the poly spots to mark the ground 6 feet apart. That's great. Throwing the football back and forth, again, you have the indirect contact going on, so great, everybody got that one. Kicking a ball or shooting at an open goal is fine. A couple people indicated they thought that shooting with an assistant coach as a goalie, that would not be permitted. Again, because that would involve indirect contact when the assistant coach touches the ball. Now, if the assistant coach is just standing there and is moving out of the way, they're not really acting as a goalie. But yeah, so very good. Okay, let's launch the second poll that goes with this. Okay. Zach or Steve, who's launching that?
Zach, if you can get that one, mine's stuck on poll 1.
I got it. I've got it. We're good. Okay. Okay. So here, check off everybody who counts towards the total number or the maximum number of folks that can participate, or that we count towards that cap, that number of 10 or fewer or 50 or fewer. Okay. Let's get one more. Okay, why don't we go ahead and close that down and share it. If I need to do that, I'll go ahead. There we go. Okay, so great. Yeah, partners, athletes, assistant coaches, head coaches, volunteers in the space. Family members who stay in the car would not count. Great. They come down to the training space, they absolutely would. So great on that. And then family members who are staying away would not. So, okay, fantastic. Let's close that there. Okay, great. I'm not going to read through this grid. When you get the slides, please do read through it. It goes into some more detail of suggestions or requirements actually in here. There are some suggestions in terms of, for example, it indicates for phase 1 and for phase 2, highly recommended to in advance educate everybody on the situation and what the high risk conditions may be and what the requirements are going to be on site. Strongly recommend as a best practice, again, doing that in advance of your first practice in person or training session in person when you're able to do that. Zoom has a free version that's good for 40 minutes. Also, many areas are getting or have gotten their own Zoom accounts, and you can utilize them. But strongly recommend that doing that ahead of time. It will, first, it may identify some athletes or some volunteers, quite frankly, who may not be able to participate based on the requirements or the risks that are involved. But also, it sort of lays down the law, if you will, in terms of what's going to be required in order for someone to participate. So same thing here. This is just a continuation of that same grid. And this is also pulled from the document, the return to play document that we showed on the first slide. But again, going through and in addition to meeting with your athletes and your team, meet with your coaching staff or your volunteers as well to kind of talk through what the protocol is going to be in terms of screening on site. We'll talk through the requirements in a moment, but how that's going to operate and who's going to do it. This is a great place to pull, if you haven't already done so, but to pull one of your area director or one of your area leaders in to be directly involved with that conversation. In most cases, they've had a program that's already started and has gone through that and can give you the rundown. In some cases, they may be planning to take care of that for your program. So it's all going to vary based on what's available and how your county is operating. But again, it's there's a lot of prep work before you ever get to that first training session. So I did want to show, there's a few videos here, and wait a minute. And this is starring.
In order to safely return to activity, Special Olympics recommends that participants wear a mask if on public transport, such as a bus, trolley, subway, or if carpooling with someone not living with them. If Special Olympics is providing transportation, face masks during travel and maintaining physical distance are required. Prior to entering any activity, practice, event, or gathering, all athletes, coaches, unified partners, volunteers, family members, and caregivers must participate in an on-site screening. It is important to take the necessary steps to create a safe on-site screening area. 1. Create a single point of entry. One entryway that allows participants to enter one at a time. Remember, we strongly advise outdoor spaces only in Phase 1. 2. Use chalk, tape, cones, or other markers to indicate what 6 feet or 2 meters looks like for physical distancing. 3. Make sure you have all the necessary supplies for a proper screening, which include temporal thermometer, pens, masks, gloves, disinfectant wipes or spray, hand sanitizer, COVID-19 participant code of conduct and risk assessment forms. Volunteers will fill out a monitoring form for each participant that passes through screening. The form includes the participant's name, contact info, temperature, answers to screening questions, and the outcome of the screening. For instance, can they participate or have they been isolated and sent home? Next, you will ask each participant the following required screening questions. We recommend using visual aids when asking the questions. 1. In the last 14 days, have you had contact with someone who has been sick with COVID-19? 2. Have you had a fever in the last week? Temperature of 100.4 degrees Fahrenheit, 37.8 degrees Celsius, or higher? 3. Do you have a cough and/or difficulty breathing? 4. Do you have any other signs or new symptoms of COVID-19? Fatigue, muscle or body aches, headache, new loss of taste or smell, sore throat, congestion or runny nose, nausea or vomiting, or diarrhea.
In the past 14 days, have you had contact with someone who has been sick with COVID?
Yes.
Yes, you have? Okay, so I'm gonna actually have you step down here.
If a participant answers yes to any questions, they must be isolated from the group, sent home, and instructed to contact their healthcare provider. Participants who are found to have COVID-19 symptoms must wait 7 days after symptoms resolve to return to activity, or must provide written proof of physician clearance to Special Olympics to return to activities. Participants who test positive or have COVID-19 must provide written medical clearance before returning to sport and fitness activities. After answering the screening questions, you will conduct on-site measurement of participants' temperatures using a thermometer, preferably a non-touch thermal scanning one if possible. If a thermometer is not available, you must ask participants to self-monitor and provide results of that monitoring. If there are any concerns about fever, temperature of 100.4 degrees Fahrenheit, 37.8 degrees Celsius or higher, the participant should not be allowed to remain on site. If high, you may retest the participant after 5 minutes to ensure temperature is accurate. Record all names, results, and contact information using the template provided, and keep in case needed for contact tracing or reporting. For more information on Special Olympics Return to Activity Protocol and safety guidelines, visit resources.specialolympics.org or consult your local program.
Okay, so just as a review, so the pre-screening process, again, there's the 4 questions, the contact with someone in the past 14 days, fever in the last week. You're going to ask them, then you're going to measure, but you're still going to ask them of 100.4 or higher, cough or difficulty breathing, and then the several other symptoms that are there. Key thing with this, what we're looking for when we ask about those other symptoms, or even for the cough, difficulty breathing one as well. In some cases, the individual, the athlete, or the volunteer, because volunteers are going through this as well, coaches go through this each practice and so on. If they have a chronic condition where they always have these situations, as an example, I have chronic sinus problems, I'm always going to answer, do I have congestion or a runny nose? I'm always going to answer that yes. So we're not looking for that. We're looking for anything that's been different, that's been changed, not if they have a chronic condition. Otherwise, a number of our athletes would never be able to participate. So, but all 4 questions need to be no, and then you measure the temperature using the thermometer. Special Olympics Maryland's provided each area with 2 thermometers. You can procure some more if you need to, depending upon the situation. If they are above the 100.4, you can let, and that can be caused by, depending upon where you're going or where your practice is. It may be, they got overheated walking from the parking lot or hauling their equipment. One other suggestion that we make is, when possible, they showed the example in the video of doing it in a pavilion, which is nice and convenient. If you can do it as close as possible to the parking lot or the parking area, that's advised, that's recommended. That way, if there is an issue and someone needs to depart, they're right there, and they can head on out. It may even be the case for snowshoeing, if you can do it before they get out of the car. It really varies upon what your capabilities are with your volunteers and such there. And I know that it's going to be disappointing when you have to turn some folks away. Luckily, that's been very rare. And by sharing this with folks ahead of time, through a webinar or a web meeting and Zoom and so on, that can help make sure folks to self-screen, if you will, ahead of time and such. So anyway, as a quick review, why don't we go ahead and launch that last poll?
Hey, Mike, while we're waiting for this poll to come up really quick too, quick anecdotal thing about the temperature too. As we start hitting the winter months here and people have the heat turned up in their car, we did have our lovely friend Pam, who handles medical for us, come out to a golf competition. And the first time we checked her, she was above 100.4, but she was in her car from Frederick the whole time with the heat blasted, wearing a wool hat. So we gave it another minute or two, and then we retook her temperature, and it was good. It was back to normal. So again, with winter coming and people being in heated cars, one thing to consider.
So I can add that Jeff Abel, when he came to visit our practice, Special Olympics, he tested at 100.4 and had to wait 5 minutes.
Okay. Must have been after he finished cleaning the bathrooms. Oh, that's on the next video.
Can I ask a question
Sure.
the first question about contact with somebody. I mean,
Yes.
So it's not that unusual right now that if you are in an apartment building, or if somebody is working in a, let's say, retail environment, that a notice is given. Somebody, may have COVID. They've gone for testing. Maybe they tested positive, but without like clear contact tracing that the individual has had contact with that person. Does that make sense? What I'm saying?
Sort of. I mean, I would always tend to be more cautious with that. So, in general, we're talking about if they've been in contact with someone who definitely had COVID. If there's a question, it's probably as to whether the person or whether or not the person in question actually had COVID. I would wait until there's some resolution on that. And then if they didn't, then they're fine to come back in. A part of the whole, beyond making sure our athletes are healthy and such, we want to do anything that we can to avoid transmission within a training program. And one of the things that you'll see later is there are circumstances during the training program where the athletes and anyone else involved with the physical activity can remove their masks during that time frame. And so even with a distance of 6 feet and so on down the line, we just need to be super cautious on that. Okay.
It's more about the, it's indeterminate if the individual's had contact with the person that it may be in the apartment building or maybe in their place of employment.
Right. Yeah. And what I'm saying is that if it's indeterminate, then I would err on the side of assuming that they have been in contact with someone who has COVID, and either wait the 14 days or when they ultimately find out, if they ultimately find out that they did not have COVID, then they're fine to participate.
Mike, I mean, what Ray is asking about is a situation where you live in an apartment building and one other person in the building tests positive.
Sure.
So I think this suggests that, and if you have no reason to know that you were in proximity to that person, to say that because another person in your building tested positive, you should quarantine for two weeks seems a little more risk averse than we need to be.
Okay, I may have misunderstood. What we're saying is, have you had contact with someone? So I live in a condo. The person I'm on the bottom floor. The person on the third floor tested, even if they tested positive, and I haven't come in contact with them in that entire time. No, I could honestly say the answer to this question is no.
Okay.
This may be one situation.
To be fair, Ray's
son, not a really good, clean answer. That.
To be fair, Ray's son and my son live in the same building, so I know exactly what he's talking about.
Yeah. So yeah, if they haven't been in contact with that individual, then that wouldn't. Then they could answer that. They could honestly answer that no. If it's more. So I've been in a situation where someone thinks that they may have had COVID. They've gone to get the test. Tests take 5 days sometimes to get the results back. They don't know. In that kind of a scenario, I would quarantine myself until we know whether that person has it or not. But then again, like I said, I've been in contact with them. I've been in their proximity. I don't think there's a really going to be a great answer for a lot of these things. It's going to be mushy to some degree, but we need to, if we consistently err on the side of caution, I think that will be best. But to move along, because we do have a chunk yet to go, Zach or Steve, can you launch that poll? And if not, let me know. And I'm not seeing anything. I'll go ahead and launch it.
You got it, Zach, right? There you go.
Oh, okay, he's got, okay, great. Thanks. So here, just answer for each question, whether it's, or check the ones that are true, and any that are false, just leave unchecked. looks like we got enough responses. Great, thanks. So, if a person answers at least 3, no, they have to answer all 4 of the questions, no. And again, with the caveat that I mentioned, that if the symptom that they're talking about is chronic, they can still answer that question, no, it's not different, it hasn't been added there. A person who has 100.4 definitely will be asked to wait 5 minutes, or you can, unless they're obviously sick for other reasons. But give them 5 minutes off to the side, away from everyone else, and then recheck. It's not just athletes and partners. And then the other 2, perfect, great. Okay, so let's close that poll, and we'll go ahead. Some of this is redundant with previous slides. Again, we'll adjust. One of the key things to keep in mind that any adjustment from the phase 1 to phase 2, or vice versa, is done in conjunction with the specific area director, and is done on an area by area basis. We don't anticipate any of that changing. Another factor that comes into play with that is the current incidence rate within the given county, and we track that. I believe the area directors have access to that information as well, but we track that throughout. I'm not going to go into the details of that, but a key thing is it can go either way, and the area directors are actively involved with that. Again, we're going by whichever is the most restrictive, and such. So, oops. There we go. If someone has a failed screening, this is just a review from before. Keep them apart from the group, and then send them home and have them contact their healthcare professional. And then again, this is just redundant. They need to wait 7 days after being symptom-free for 7 days, or have a written physician clearance. And then if they actually do test positive themselves, then they would need to definitely have the medical clearance. The first bullet is if they have symptoms but haven't tested positive. The second is if they absolutely do test positive, what you need to do. Okay. Acknowledgement of risk. There is a new form that we're utilizing that it's not a new waiver. It literally is them acknowledging that they understand the risk that's involved with participation. Needs to be signed by all participants or their guardian if they're a minor. That includes athletes, that includes partners, coaches, volunteers, anybody who is there with the program. And we'll see the form in a minute. It's very simple. It acknowledges that they understand that there are high-risk populations. They may be part of a high-risk population in situations. They understand what's going to be required to keep themselves safe at the practice and at the training. And they'll also, they understand that they'll be asked to leave if they can't adhere to those behaviors. Certainly that's not the first thing to do if someone makes a slip at the first practice, makes an error in terms of social distancing or something at the first practice. So, but that could ultimately happen. Need one signed document for every person. At this point, we are anticipating that it is a sort of one and then you're done. You never have to redo it, with one caveat. That may change with stuff from SOI, but we don't anticipate that. So it's done. We're tracking it in GMS. Area directors can pull that information. So anybody who has participated in one of the fall sports would have that up to date. The one situation where you would need to get a new one done would be when someone becomes an adult on their 18th birthday. Basically where they are no longer a minor or no longer have someone who is their guardian with that. In that case, because they can then sign for themselves, they would need to fill out a new one. But it's pretty straightforward. The other component there to be sure of is both the screening forms as well as the acknowledgement of risk forms need to be sent in to Special Olympics Maryland within a week of the activity, or the first time that the person's participated for the acknowledgement of risk forms. your individual area has their process in terms of who's going to send it in. It's not individual coaches sending it in. Again, check with your area leadership in terms of specifically what's happening within your area in terms of how they're handling that. The form itself lists, there's actually a first page that lists all the risks and stuff. We'll see the basic content of that in a moment. This form is included in that guide that we showed you. It's also available for download as a form itself from the coach's resource page. But reviewing that, reviewing the risks, reviewing the expectations here, they'll stay at home if they have symptoms. They'll keep the 6 foot or 2 meter distance from participants, won't share drinking bottles, etc. On there. And then they put in their full name and program what their role is. And assuming they can sign for themselves, they sign here. If not, the guardian signs there and then gives their relationship and so on down the line. This last page, the actual form, is all that needs to be sent in. We don't need the other pages because they're just repeated printouts. Excuse me with that. So, and again, it's available in those 2 locations. The first page that I didn't show there, but talks about high-risk individuals and such, lists and goes through these different situations. It's people who are 65 or older or live in a nursing or a long-term care facility are considered at a higher risk for severe illness with COVID-19 or likelihood of catching it. That includes individuals who live in group homes. Then also people with any number of underlying health conditions may also be more subject to more significant problems should they contract COVID. Excuse me. What the form is doing, that acknowledgement of risk, is them acknowledging that, okay, I understand that this is a potential risk, and even knowing that, I do want to participate. We are not in the position of telling an individual who, even if they have one of the high risks here, that they can't participate. That is their decision with their family member or their guardian or their house counselor, whatever the case may be. But what we do require is they acknowledge that they have, that they understand what the risk is that's involved. Certainly we understand that some of our athletes may have difficulty understanding this. We rely on the family member and the counselors and so on down the line to help them with that, just as signing the waiver portion, at least, of the medical form where they acknowledge about the challenges that are there. So with that in mind, so need to fill that out, send it in. There's a practice log that needs to be captured at each individual practice. That's available in the guide and also on the coach resource page that's there. Please do not make up your own template. Use the form that we've provided. That said, if you're having multiple practices, you can take that template and populate it with the information that's not going to change, such as all the names, the contact information, so on down the line. And then just print out a new one that you use for screening at each of the practices. You need the contact information in case there is someone who comes up later as positive, as we were talking about before, and we need to contact people directly or to let them know about the situation. And again, get that into us within a week of each practice session. Talk to your area director for the specifics on what that process will be. Excuse me.
Hey, Mike, we did have a question real quick that came in from Raymond in regards to the medicals. I haven't looked real closely at the medicals. I know there are some things in there that say specifically about high risk, but you know if all those are on the medical form offhand?
I believe all of those are on the form. They are not all in GMS, but they are all on the form. So unfortunately, we only capture in GMS those parts of the medical form that we need in a database. If it's a situation where we're going to look up the medical form anyway, we don't bother putting it in. It's really, it's a cost benefit analysis there, but it's always on the medical form. So it would behoove you, hopefully every coach is reviewing your medical forms anyway at the beginning of a season. It would behoove you to do that. A great question though. To look through that.
So is this self-identifying that a person is high risk, or are they identified as high risk and then they're explicitly asked if they choose
so
to or not?
Yeah, so well, good question. We're not asking individuals who are high risk any separate question. They're all, everybody, whether they're in high risk or not, are getting the same form and they're completing it. What is provided in the form are those things that categorize someone as high risk. It's incumbent upon the individual or the guardian or whoever is assisting the individual to go through and let them know. So it's not something, we're not doing anything special for the high risk, related to the high risk individuals. But the process and the acknowledgement of risk takes care of making sure that they're aware of what the situation is. Is that, I'm not sure if that answers your question, Ray.
Yeah, it's up to the individual. So
yeah,
really
but to be clear, there's nothing. The high risk individuals aren't being segregated in terms of communication. Certainly not at the event, but in terms of communication, everyone's getting the same information. Okay. Excuse me. Let's see.
Preparing the venue to safely welcome Special Olympics participants is vital for return to activity for phases 1 and 2. Arrive early to prepare the space. Start by ensuring the venue is disinfected or sanitized, especially the bathrooms and other high-touch areas. Wear disposable gloves for all tasks in the cleaning process, including the handling of trash. After sanitizing the space, set up signage that reinforces proper hygiene procedures, physical distancing, and wearing personal protective equipment, or PPE. Post signs in easy-to-understand language with visual cues in highly visible locations, like entrances and restrooms. The signs should describe how to stop the spread of germs by properly washing hands, following physical distancing guidelines, and explaining how to properly wear a cloth face covering. Also, make sure hand sanitizer and/or hand washing facilities or stations are available. Lastly, set up a single entry with screening and a single exit area, which means there should be one entrance into the venue and one exit out of the venue that allows participants to be at least 2 meters or 6 feet apart. For more information on Special Olympics Return to Activity Protocol and safety guidelines, visit resources.specialolympics.org or consult your local program.
Should also note that all these videos that we have within the slide deck here, the links to them are also available for you within that, and they are certainly available to share. I believe there's also links on the return to play.
Preparing the
Sorry. There we go.
So, Mike, I just want to add that Jeff was chosen the directors chose Jeff to clean the bathroom because it was clear he was the most qualified and appropriate for the task.
Yeah, and I should clarify also, no, we are not expecting you to go in before each practice and wash down the bathrooms that are in there. Do the, wipe down handles, that type of thing, from a safety standpoint. So we've provided to each area, each area should have on site that different set there that was talked about actually, I think, in the first video. We've provided each area 2 thermometers, a box of gloves, and can get the additional materials or supplies for you, or your area can get it on your own. The key thing is this is all handled through your area director. So before you start, talk with this. Should also point out, in case there's any question, here we're talking about for your practices and your trainings and such. If you have a 1 day, everybody come out and learn snowshoeing session, well, in no more than a group of 10, but still, that still counts in having to go through all these different processes here. All of this is required for any event that involves athletes. With masks and face coverings, I'm not going to read this to you, read it on your own. Here's the nutshell. Athletes and unified teammates, unified partners need to be wearing their masks through arrival, check-in, going through the screening, and getting over to where they are going to participate. Once they start in physical activity, they can take off the mask. So while they are doing their warm-ups, while they are doing their whatever your drills are that you're doing, they can take their masks off at that time. But during any other time when the session is over and they're getting ready to leave, put them back on. For excuse me, for coaches, volunteers, and so on down the line, they should be wearing their masks throughout the duration of the practice, unless they themselves are actively involved with the physical activity that's going on. So if you're, as the head coach, are standing in one spot and directing your athletes to run in their snowshoes around a particular course, you should have your mask on because you're not physically involved with the physical activity. If you're running with them, then certainly you can take it off. Of course, throughout this entire time, there's physical distancing of 6 meters or 6 feet or more rather, and no direct contact, and at least in phase 1, no indirect contact either. Here we get to see the acting prowess of Mr. John Bogaski as well. So I think he's in this video.
As a coach, you have a critical role in ensuring the safety of your participants. It is necessary to adapt some of your coaching strategies to lead safe practices under Special Olympics' new Return to Activity guidelines. Before each activity, communicate the need for high-risk individuals to participate at home, and have all participants complete the COVID-19 Participant Code of Conduct and Risk Assessment forms. Forms may be tracked in GMS if the program would like. During practice, it is important to maintain physical distancing of at least 6 feet or 2 meters between all participants. To do this, place markers on the ground to indicate what 6 feet is and have extra volunteers to remind participants to maintain their distance. We know it is difficult, but to ensure the safety of everyone participating, there are no fist bumps, high fives, hugs, or huddles right now during this COVID-19 pandemic. You can still support your friends and teammates by cheering each other on. All participants should come to the activity with their own supplies and cannot share masks, water bottles, towels, or uniforms. In Phase 2, the use of shared equipment is allowed, but should be limited. All equipment will be disinfected between each use. Wear face masks throughout activities, including arrivals and departures. Do not touch the outside of the mask. Do not scratch or touch your face. Masks do not need to be worn during active exercise. However, if sneezing, coughing, or yawning without a face mask on, participants should cover their faces with a tissue or elbow, not their hands, and throw away any tissues and wash their hands immediately. Throughout the activity, use verbal and visual signs to remind participants about hygiene, standard infection prevention, physical distancing, and use of personal protective equipment, or PPE. For more information on Special Olympics Return to Activity protocol and safety guidelines, visit resources.specialolympics.org or consult your local program.
Okay. So this is slightly dated in that they make reference for high-risk individuals to participate at home, which they certainly could do, but they are able to participate there. So thank you to John and
my finest
Joe.
moment.
And, I'm sorry?
My finest moment.
That's right. So you're signing autographs
Yeah.
later. They actually on very short notice came together, and those videos are being utilized throughout the country for this. So it's not, those aren't just Maryland, although it is all Maryland athletes. Dan Tucholsky, Ava's son, had a starring role in the first video as well, walking up to get screened. So way to go, Dan, too. So let's see.
As a coach,
there we go. Okay. So let's see, for training resources that are available, we mentioned about the 3 videos specifically for athletes that are available, and those links are all available there. These videos are available. This slide deck is available, and I strongly recommend you use some of those resources in meeting with both your coaching team as well as your athletes. And it's also a great way to get athletes to see each other if they haven't seen each other for a while in advance in preparation for your first training session. The SOI is working with NGBs for some sports specific resources. I don't think there's anything specific right now to snowshoeing that's available, but should they become available, we will certainly share them with you. And then we are going through some orientations with general volunteers who may be available on going through the specific screening process and so on. A couple things to keep in mind specific to snowshoeing. The outdoor portion, for the most part, is relatively straightforward. The challenges also, though, can come into play when we're at indoor activities. And that I realize that you may be practicing outdoors without anybody coming indoors, and that's fine. But if there is an indoor component, we really need to keep the groups to that 10, and you may not be able to have more than one group in a building at a time. This is going to be coming, and I'm sorry, it references bowling there. We'll fix that. But will come into play if we're able to have something at Whitetail or at another facility. Another thing that ties in with that, so that everyone is aware, if you hadn't heard, back on the 20th, so 10 days ago, the Pennsylvania Department of Health issued a travel restriction for folks coming into Pennsylvania from other states, and it's in effect indefinitely. I would assume it's going to be in effect for at least another few weeks, if not further. So we are keeping an eye on it. What that travel restriction involves is, if you are as long as you're not doing this for work, excuse me, if you travel into Pennsylvania from any other state, you either have to have had a COVID test that shows negative within 72 hours prior to going into that state, into Pennsylvania, or upon arrival within Pennsylvania, you need to self-quarantine for 14 days. That certainly would make the prospect of going up to Whitetail for a day not practical. So we're keeping an eye on it. We're not going to make any decisions about any of the training dates that we have for January or February until we get closer to those timeframes. But we'll need to keep an eye on that and such, and just want to make sure folks are aware of that if they had any plans to do that. Or I know that Montgomery County also has a cross-country program that maybe I guess might be planning on something along those lines. So it is what it is. Then also for the local ski resorts, and for Whitetail, Liberty, and Round Top, they're all owned by the same or part of the same company, Vail Properties. I don't, well, I know that WISP is not part of that group, and we don't know their specific requirements, but the ones that are relevant to folks, the walk-up purchases, that's skiing related. If we are up there, masks are required at all times while on the property. So we would follow that rather than having our athletes or folks take off their masks during activity, if that is still in effect. They're operating at 50% on indoor facilities. So that what that would also mean is if we're able to have something there, programs can't go up and commandeer a space in the lodge. Family members or others who transported the athletes won't be able to stay inside during that time either. Basically, if you're inside, you're in, you eat, you leave, and you don't hold your space. We recognize that can cause some challenges, but just want to make sure folks are aware of that should we be able to have something for the training days. And again, the reservations are for more for Alpine, but any of those snow dates, we would definitely need to have people registered ahead of time by name, not just rough numbers. We would need to know that. And these are all in addition to the SOMD protocols. Given this, and given that some of those aspects might change, if we are able to have an on-snow training in January, we'll have a you know how we usually have a pre-competition webinar, we'll have a pre-on-snow training webinar for Alpine and for snowshoeing. It probably doesn't make sense to combine them, but we'll have that prior to that first on-snow session, if it looks like it's feasible. If it's not, then we'll do it before the one that hopefully we'll be able to have at the beginning of February. Okay. So, did want to have a little discussion. So when we think about, and we know that this whole situation puts some significant challenges for any kind of in-person activity related to snowshoeing or for any of our sports. So given that we do have to have a social distancing of 6 feet or more at all times, what might be some of the challenges that might cause for your program, or what might you have to do differently? What are some of the implications that you might have to do a little differently to have a snowshoeing program with the social distancing? You can put this in the chat if you'd like. And what I would like to do, though, while we're doing that, if I can ask, not to put you on the spot, but I'll do it anyway. John, I know your program, you've done some dryland training already. So yeah. Are there any lessons learned that you found already from?
Well, I'm not sure I had to give up. Sure. So. I mean, I had to give up practicing relays, passing the baton, because that was completely impossible with the restriction on distancing. I did come up with some new drills. I mean, I sort of set up where we practice a little bit of an obstacle course. It's just a little bit of a hill they have to run over, but I would set up cones to do the social distancing and have them run it in intervals, one at a time. They sort of run part of the track, then they walk back, and then they run it again, but they're always 6 feet apart. The other thing that I did, we always would play towards the end of practice, play different versions of tag. Sharks and minnows was the game that we played, but we if you can see in the picture behind me, I altered that. I got them all pool noodles. So, and they would tag with the pool noodles. So a 2-foot arm, 4-foot pool noodle was 6 feet. And so they got to still do the tag. They each had their own pool noodle. So I guess in theory is a little indirect touching, but I mean, it's like on the shoulder or the body on one end and their hand. So pretty minor, but they had a blast running around. Mm-hmm. The very last practice I did, I broke the rules a little bit. We tried baton pass. We used the pool noodle as a baton and tried that as baton passing. And that was entertaining also. I mean, some of it's in snowshoeing, it's just creating a little variety and a little interest in what we're doing. Because I mean, just running all the way through practice, at least for my guys, gets too boring. You got to add something to it to keep the practice interesting. But those are some things that we did. We've had 3 practices so far. We start early, so we've already had our 3rd practice. Okay,
yeah, great. And I think the pool noodle concept of, particularly for showing social distancing, because that for some folks, athletes and coaches and volunteers as well, that may be hard to visualize at all times, and I think the pool noodle does that in terms of helping maintain that, and that may pay off later in terms of the maintaining your 6-foot distancing down the road. Yeah, we do need to maintain the no indirect contact, and I'll just save that as a reminder there. So hold on a sec. So a couple that we came up with, but it looks like, oops, sorry, back up here. Then Kathy also indicated that your practice area is narrow and usually did laps. We'll have to turn them, I'm not sure, Kathy, can you unmute? I'm not sure I follow what your solution might be.
I'll probably have to have them turn like away from each other and go up. They used to come together like we do at some of the things and go around a cone together and that kind of thing. When they were coming down, I can spread them out coming down, but then when they would go around the cone, they would go together usually. When they were going around a cone to come back up. And so I'll have to put cones at the end of each lane to keep them separated to be able to keep the distances. Sure. Which is going to make it a little bit different for them to learn to follow a different pattern.
Okay. And I'm assuming that you really
have a pretty narrow.
Yeah. You can't widen that space, whatever space you're utilizing. You're stuck with what that is, right?
No.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Being creative or staggering when folks are going. Okay. Anyone else come up with any other implications? We said social distancing, but let's also, for the no indirect or direct contact, there's just a couple suggestions.
I'll add, everybody had to put on their own, in order to participate, you had to put on your own snowshoes.
Right.
I did let people at the beginning of practice, right at the beginning, but they put on their snowshoes where athletes needed it. And then after that, they were 50 feet away.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, your survey says 50 meters, which is a little far.
Right. I don't know that it's clearly defined, either one. So
50 meters is 150 feet. That's crazy.
It's half a track. It's a half 100. Yeah. I'm talking to a track guy. I know 50 meters. So yeah. So, yeah, 50 feet should be fine with this. But yeah, thank you for pointing that out. This could be a particular challenge for athletes or partners for that matter, or Ron's not on the call, is he? I was going to say GMT members who have difficulty putting on their own snowshoes. Certainly if someone lives within who lives with them, family member or house counselor or whatever, since they've already been living with each other, that's sort of an exception, if you will, to the 6 feet distancing, because they're not 6 feet distancing at home. So you could allow that. We had to do a similar thing, or allowed a similar thing with golf cart usage when we were doing golf. So it may be something where you have a training session with family members to potentially do that. This was identified when we were talking with area directors on this whole situation originally, as well as the GMT, that this could be for, particularly for snowshoeing, but also possibly for skiing. That the ability to put on and take off their own snowshoes could be a challenge, because the coach, unless the coach is a family member or a house counselor or whatever, a co-resident with an athlete, coach will not be able to do that. And like, because of the social distancing, we understand that that's a challenge, but that would be a requirement there. So, so yeah, it could be that you do a small training program for family members. If family members are the ones who are bringing athletes, but for family members of athletes who can't do it themselves, and maybe train them, including knowing which foot which snowshoe goes on too. I know that can be a confusing point too. So other aspects of either social distancing or direct or indirect contact restrictions that could cause problems. Yeah, John indicated that you did.
I'll add one other thing I did is I went out and bought an amplifier. So I have a little, because I have the mask on, and I don't want the athletes to walk up to me because they can't hear. So I bought the teachers use them. I bought an amplifier, so I got a microphone in front of me and a little speaker box in my belt. It costs like $30, but that way they can hear me without having to get close, hear me through the mask, so I don't have to shout.
Right.
And they can hear me, and it just works better when everybody has to be a lot more spread out. You can get them off Amazon. It's very, very easy to get one of them. Look up amplifiers.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, or a bullhorn if you and
no, not a bullhorn, because this is just a little thing I put on my head with a little microphone.
Oh no, what I'm saying though is that if you don't have the wherewithal to do that, or your program, if you have a bullhorn or access to a bullhorn, that could serve in the same purpose. So, yeah, and good. Eva's you all are gonna cover that with folks. So it looks like Janet Howard is having that is a similar challenge, and having parents do that or counselors or whatever. But yeah, and again, doing that as part of the training or the stuff ahead of time on video or on Zoom rather can be very helpful. Let's see. And so we kind of talked through some of this, but kind of thinking through some of that. What I'd like to do now, if we can, is I'm going to stop sharing and turn it over to Mr. Cintron to take us the rest of the way home.
All right, folks, we're going to hit some of the snowshoeing specific stuff once I share my screen. And once I share the slides, and then Mike tells me that the slides are on the wrong side and you guys are looking at the notes. Now I got to.
Sorry, now we are looking at your notes. Now we go. There we go. We were looking at your PowerPoint originally.
It is without fail that I show the notes. It's kind of part of my process at this point. But we're just going to hit some of the more snowshoeing specific stuff. Again, you guys should be used to seeing the slide. You should probably see it in your dreams at this point. That, again, no athlete or volunteer can participate in programming without a valid medical or the valid volunteer certifications that they need. Again, no exceptions to that policy. When it comes to deadlines for winter, I know we're going to have smaller groups probably participating in person. We do have people going online for things, so it's a little bit different than a typical year where you just register everybody that's training at that point. We're still looking to put people into GMS for training for purposes of tracking who's actually participating in things. So that's in person and virtual. But the deadlines that you guys are seeing on here relate to registration for the potential ONSOs that we're having. Again, you can see the note at the top, how things were determined that we wouldn't be holding a state championship for 2021. We are planning on holding the ONSO trainings. But again, these are the dates that we're looking for registration to be turned in. The forms are available on the Snowshoeing Coach resource page, but we will send those out to you in a follow-up here, so you don't have to go digging around for them. And again, just a reminder that if you have participants or programs virtually training, we do want them registering for training as well, even if they are not planning to come to an on-snow. What's required for all the participants? You guys have seen this as the very lovely Janet Larimore logo that she's put together. The major difference for what we're showing you here is that while they need all the typical medical form and certifications for coaches for the different levels, everybody needs that acknowledgement of risk form if they are participating in in-person programming. Again, we want everybody to have all their medicals up to date, have all their coaches' certifications up to date, just as we would on a typical year. But again, that acknowledgement of risk for in-person activities is very important. Training recommendations. So the GMT has a couple recommendations for you guys as you start training or continue training. And the first one that we put in here is start preparing your athletes to put on and take off their snowshoes individually I know that's a little bit of a tall task for some athletes, but this is the year to really, really start working on that. We did talk about how people of the same household can assist putting them on. But the difficult thing, and all of you guys know from being on snows and time trials and stuff like that, if we're using that ops building behind the Mountain Ops Center there for an on snow, things are really tight back there. So if every athlete, or even a quarter of the athletes that come need a household member to put on snowshoes, we're going to be really pushing that social distancing with the room that we have back there. We're not going to have access to the sitting inside the bays and stuff like that. And even you guys all know from being down at the tubing park, even for the Monday, Tuesday competition days of winter games, once you get into staging there, staging gets pretty tight, especially once you get to the on snow staging. In past years, coaches have the opportunity to go and help an athlete, clip on their snowshoes at the last minute sitting there and staging. But if we're doing social distancing, we're going to have to spread out staging more. And the more that a person needs somebody to accompany them to put the snowshoe on, the more people we're going to get clumped up in areas that we're trying to keep decluttered. Again, for this season, there's no state championship that we're planning to hold. And again, with the event types that we are offering, we're not planning to offer any sort of awards for these. It's really looking to set personal bests and kind of set a pace for potentially next season. It's a great time to sit down with your athletes and emphasize personal best and refining technique. We're talking about offering races no more than one lap on the 200-meter course. We have some long distance athletes that can do 200 meters in their sleep. But this year we're going to recommend that if they're doing that 200 meters as the longest distance, you're really working with them to refine their technique to maximize their pace and the speed at which they run for them to set a personal best. And then year after year, they can track that. And now trying to break a personal best becomes the biggest goal for the season, which at times can put you in a position where if you're breaking your personal best, you're probably putting yourself in a good position to win a medal of some sort at least. And then the other recommendation, again, the virtual training guide is out for snowshoeing. With snowshoeing being very long distance running oriented, we did combine the snowshoeing and long distance running guide. So they are half and half of this guide, but a lot of the content for each one you can use for the other sport as well. The only difference is you're putting on or taking off snowshoes. So you got a lot of good options in there, and there are a bunch of additional resources that you can pull other training items from, YouTube videos, so on and so forth, that are in this guide. This can be found on the coach resource page for snowshoeing, and I will drop it in the follow-up email as well, so you guys have it coming directly to you. So just some really surface level plans and stuff when we're talking about potential on snow opportunities. Right now, I'm guessing that for the first two on snows, we probably won't have access to the tubing park because it's on a weekend and they try to get tubing business still. So we will more than likely be at the ops building. Again, the first on snow is scheduled for January 9th. The second one scheduled for February 6th. And then we've talked about holding another one on Winter Games weekend. or if Mike or Steve can run that fourth poll, if you guys could do me a quick favor, and again, this is not determining the fate of the last potential on snow, would you have interest in attending that last on snow? And does it make a difference to you if it's held on Sunday and or Monday? Sunday most likely means we're at Mountain Ops. Monday most likely means we could be at the tubing park. All right, that looks like we have our 9 there. You can end that and show that if you want. I'll talk about it for 2 seconds real quick here. So if you're seeing the results, it looks like more people are in favor of Monday at the tubing park. I think the tubing park definitely makes a little bit more sense. We can get a fuller, more spread out course there. We can get more staging spread out there as well. I think, and folks can correct me if they want to jump in if I'm wrong about this, but my assumption would be that if you had selected Sunday, it's potentially because of either participant or coach work purposes. I know that is a hang up with winter games at times. But that's good to know that more people lean towards Monday at the tubing park. Again, nothing definitive there, just trying to get a pulse of who's on here with you guys having, as much experience with snowshoeing as all of you do. Again, I mentioned these are the events that we're looking to offer distance-wise. Again, no relays because of indirect contact.
The 222 event could help.
But these are the events that we would more than likely offer. And if anybody has any questions about that or concerns or questions about longer events, feel free to reach out to myself and we can definitely talk about that.
The other thing, Zach, this is Steve, just to chime in on that. Currently, Whitetail has said we look to have the option on that Monday to use the tubing park. But again, with their operations and everything, it's kind of up in the air what will happen. So that's the plan for now. So just want to make sure it's not a guarantee that we'll have the tubing park. So just want to put that caveat in there. Thank you, Zach.
Thanks, Steve. Some surface level details. I will say myself and the Snowshoeing GMT, we have come up with plans for on snow training at both the ops building and the tubing park. And each plan has a little bit different of a sequence of how we're going to run things based on openings and availability of space. Additionally, each plan has a little bit different of a check-in kind of plan for screening as well. But the basic concept for the day is more likely we'll run 2 groups depending on our numbers for registration for 2 3-hour training sessions. We typically in the past, we all come up there and we train for about 4 or 5 hours, lunch in there at some point. But with how tight it is, anticipating we'll be at the ops building, we'll probably divide into a morning and afternoon type of group. Again, the one thing to factor in when you're talking to your parents about this is we're not going to have any seating inside for athletes or coaches or parents if we're at the ops building or if we're down at the tubing park in the lodge with the food and concessions. Indoor seating is just not going to be an option. We may be able to come up with something creative outdoor that might work. But as of right now, no indoor seating. And there's not going to be a hangout area. We're not going to advertise spectator areas for families. Again, being in phase 1 conditions, most likely, it's really tight and hard to invite them in to spectate something where we're in such close proximity because of the location of the event that we're able to hold it. Again, we're going to try to afford the opportunity to those that want to attend it. But there are going to be some limiting circumstances that participants may have to think about if they're able to work with that situation. Screenings and check-ins. Again, we will have some sort of pre-on-snow training webinar prior to the first on-snow there where you'll get the full details. But as of right now, both location plans for screening has a separate section in one of the parking lots where participants will pull in and they will be screened away from the venue to begin with. And then if they pass the screening and everything, they will be directed onto event parking specifically. If for some reason they don't pass the screening and they don't pass that second screening after 5 minutes, they'll be asked to pull out of the temporary parking and exit the Whitetail Resort altogether. Again, we have some maps that we've drawn up for that. We will hopefully have some volunteers that can help direct from step to step of that to make your life a little bit easier. But just so you guys know, the current game plan is a separated check-in just to keep the venue. But we will give you the full details prior to That first on snow, tentatively right now, that is the game plan. And that's it for snowshoeing specific notes. You guys know the deal for the most part. We're not going over rules and stuff specifically this time around. You guys have a really good grasp on the rules, and if you have a question about them, feel free to reach out and ask. But before we hit the resources that we'll blow through really quick, any snowshoeing specific questions that anybody has when it comes to the event or potentially training for this season?
I did want to just remind folks, reiterate something I said at the very beginning, which is it's okay if you decide that either this isn't something that you can, you and your team and your athletes can do this season. It's also okay if you only do something virtual, or if you train, do dry land or do training in your local area. Hopefully we'll get some natural snow, and don't go to any of the trainings that we offer on snow, assuming we're able to do that. Whatever works is fine, including if you decide that this is just not the time to do anything. Several of the other sports are in that same situation where some areas just are not going to be able to offer even very popular sports. And it's disappointing, but it is the case of what we're dealing with here. So don't feel bad. You need to make the best decision that you possibly can. That's for the safety of your athletes and for yourself and your other coaches as well. So just leave that as that. And Zach, I don't know that we need to go through all the stuff here, but yep.
Yeah, so at the end, once you get the slide deck, there's all the resources. Again, it's mostly working with your area leadership, and it covers, shows you the athlete medical form, the volunteer background, so on and so forth. But in our last couple minutes here, while we're respecting everyone's time this evening, does anybody have any questions on anything that was presented on today?
Zach, I just wanted to show when I was talking about an amplifier, I wanted to show what it looked like.
Oh, okay.
I don't know if you can see this, but this
Sure.
This is the headset. It's got a wire on it. It goes down to this box that sits on my belt.
Yeah. John, that's when you were doing your Madonna tour, right?
It's been a secret desire of mine for so long. But I mean, it just goes on like this, but when you have the mask on, it really helps to project your voice a little bit because it comes out of this box on your belt. And so when you're at snowshoe practice, you're trying to keep everybody away from you. This makes it a natural thing.
Yeah.
So that's why I want people to see there's different, the one we bought was a GIECY, Geisy. I probably was, recommended on Amazon, but there's other ones. I don't think it matters that much. But I wanted people to understand what it was because it really did help because you're outside, the mask is on, the athletes are all spread out. It's hard. You just can't shout loud enough. People need to hear you. And this seems to have really helped.
And just to confirm, first, thanks for showing that, but battery life is good for a training session.
Yeah, it's totally not an issue.
Great.
It's a rechargeable battery.
Gotcha.
I mean, I think it lasts for like 12 hours or something, or 10 hours is what they say. Practice is an hour and a half.
So it's Jim Schmutz capable, is what you're saying.
Well, that's a pretty high standard. I don't know if I can go there.
Hi, Shelley.
Yeah, if you think I've seen these videos, Shelley's on a lot of these webinars, and she's always over there listening to them. Well, I'm sitting here, so I'm very up to speed.
All righty. Any other questions here before we close out for the night? Again, a reminder, you will get a follow-up email with a handful of things in it for your reading pleasure and some other action items as well. Not seeing anybody unmuting. Doesn't look like we have any new questions.
I would like to say thank you to everybody at whatever level you're able, even if it's that you think through things and decide that you can't do anything this time. Truly do appreciate everything you do and everything you work for to provide the best opportunities for your athletes. At some point, hopefully in the near future, things will be somewhat back to normal. But I do appreciate your willingness to at least think through some opportunities that we may be able to offer for our athletes. So kudos to you, and hopefully wish everyone a happy holiday season, and look forward to hopefully seeing you in January.
And additionally, if there's any questions, concerns, or items that you guys need help with, or something feels like it's missing, reach out to me. Email, phone call. You guys should all have some sort of phone number for me at this point. Again, I'm the New Jersey number, so it's not a spam call, I promise. But if you have anything that you need, questions you have, feel free to reach out. We're available for sure. Steve, anything you want to close out with?
No, I think as Mike indicated, and Zach, with all of your guys' efforts and thanking you for what you do, I just want to give a quick shout out to our friends at Whitetail, keeping us informed of the new ownership with Vail Resort Properties, the conditions with Pennsylvania, as well as what they're doing there. What I will say is they are completely on board with doing anything they can to provide something for us. It's a true partnership. So I just want to give them an acknowledgement of their partnership as well.
All right.
I want to add one more thing. I want to thank Mike and Steve and Zach for all that you do for our athletes, because all the hard questions bump to your desks. Yeah. So thank you for fielding.
Appreciate that, John. Thank you.
Well, thanks everybody for joining us tonight. Again, if you have any questions, reach out. We'll have a follow-up email for you, and hopefully we will see you in snowshoes sometime this winter. Thanks, guys. Have a great night.
Great. Thank you.
Good night. Thank you.